Hey friends, welcome back. And today I'm going to do a little mid-year reading reflection. I know a lot of people do the mid-year freakout tag and they answer a bunch of questions, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go over a couple of stats and then maybe talk about some books that I liked, some that I didn't like, and then maybe discuss what I plan on reading for the rest of the year. So, as of June 30th, I've read 50 books, which to me is outstanding. Normally, I don't read 50 books in a year. I started tracking my reading in 2020, so I don't think I've ever read 50 books in a year. In 2023, which is the year I read the most since I started tracking, I read only 31 books. I do believe that the Jane Austen course that I'm taking and my travel schedule this year has allowed me to read a lot more than I normally would have. I've traveled about 3 or 4 times this year for work, which normally I don't travel that much for work. Maybe it's like once or twice. And then I had a couple of personal trips. So I was able to cram in a lot more reading than I normally would have. I read 60% fiction and 40% nonfiction. And the top genre that I read was classics, followed by literary fiction. 12 books out of the 50 were rereads. So that's about 25% were rereads, which were all classics. I'm not surprised at that. The classics are my favorite, and I do reread them a lot. Putting aside the rereads, there were a couple of books new to me that I really enjoyed, and the first one was Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid. I read this early this year as a companion to Villette by Charlotte Bronte, and that was for a literary roundtable discussion that I was a part of. And I will link the video where I talk about Villette and Lucy. So I won't do too much of an analysis on Lucy, but in this story, we follow Lucy, a young woman from the West Indies, leaving home for the first time to become an au pair to a wealthy white family in a major city. And she explores herself, her independence, her sexuality, and her very complicated relationship with her mother. The language in this book was just so raw and honest, and I could feel all that Lucy felt. This story is also autofiction. Jamaica Kincaid herself, as a 19-year-old young woman with a complicated history with her mother, left her home in the West Indies, traveled to New York to become an au pair. So a little bit of autofiction here. And like I said, for a full review of Lucy and how it kind of was inspired by Villette by Charlotte Bronte, I will link that video for you to check out. But I really enjoyed this book, and I do plan on checking out more of Kincaid's work. Next is In Search of the Color Purple, the story of an American masterpiece by Salome Shah Tillett. This was my February pick for the Massachusetts Center of the Book Reading Challenge, the prompt being a book with a color in the title. Tillett is an activist and academic, and this book is part cultural criticism, part history of Walker's journey to writing The Color Purple, and part memoir about Tillett's own experiences with the novel. If you love The Color Purple by Alice Walker, you absolutely have to read this book. It was so informative, and I learned so much about how Walker came to the story, how she based some of the characters on real women in her life. It was just so wonderful. And I do have a video where I review this more thoroughly, so I will include a link to that. But I can't recommend this enough. Any video for any booktuber that I see that has mentioned The Color Purple, I'm in the comments telling them to read this book because it is just that good and informative. So, In Search of the Color Purple by Salome Shah Tillett. Lastly, Jane Austen's Letters, collected and edited by Deirdre LaFay. Now, I just talked about this in my last video, so I won't bore you with more gushing about Jane Austen, but this is a collection of all of Jane Austen's surviving letters. There's about 160 of them, and they just give you such insight into, her daily life and her writing and her observations and her family. And it was just absolute joy to read. I'll also link the video where I talk about this more in depth. But if you are a fan of Jane Austen, you will not be disappointed with this book. 4 books out of the 50 that I read so far, I hated them so much that I'm not even going to tell you the names of the books or the author, but it was a series by a very well-known romance author. I had downloaded the series in a bundle and I read through them, and they were so horrible, so toxic, that I just can't in good conscience say who it is because I have nothing good or constructive to say about this author or those books. The stories were written in the 90s, and apparently it was okay to write romance novels in the 90s where the men just do not take no for an answer. I don't like that, and I have no desire to read those types of romance books. So I apologize that I'm not going to give you the names, but there were 4 books that I absolutely hated. There were a couple of books that I really wanted to love and I had high expectations for, but they kind of just fell short. I didn't hate them, like I hated those romance novels, but they weren't on my top list of those were really great, I need to recommend to everyone. So the first book that I read that I was really disappointed in was Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead by Sheryl Sandberg. I already gave away my copy, so I'll put a picture up here. I started this book a couple of years ago, and then I only just finished it early this year. And I think if I had read the book when it came out like 10 years ago, my mind would have been blown. Unfortunately, it's just information that I already knew. And then a lot of changes have occurred for women in the years since this book was published. Not everything. There's still a lot of issues, but there have been significant changes, especially after the pandemic. People able to work from home, which has been mainly beneficial to women. In addition, I found this book really would resonate only with white upper class women. It completely leaves out women of color and underprivileged women. So I do not recommend Lean In. I'm sure it was fantastic when it came out 10 years ago, but it didn't age well. So I would love for Sandberg to update it and include women of color and underprivileged women in this story. This next book I really wanted to love. I really, really did. And it was good, but it just wasn't everything I hoped for. And that is The Unlikely Escape of Uriah Heep by H.G. Parry. This is in the magical realism genre and set in New Zealand. We follow Charlie Sutherland, who has magical ability to bring characters in books to life, and his brother Rob, who has been protecting Charlie for his entire life. And he's just sick of it. Out of nowhere, tons of literary characters start showing up in their little town and start causing trouble and threaten to destroy the world. I was thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to have all of these fantastic literary characters from my favorite books, and it's going to be cozy, and I'm going to read it every year. Unfortunately, it was not that. It was actually a very dark story. And, these literary characters are bringing on the end of the world, and Charlie has this magical ability that may or may not be able to save them. And it took forever to get to the climax. I just wanted it to just finish, just end. But I did really enjoy all of the references to the literary characters. Most of the characters that were brought to life in the book were from the classics. Maybe there were copyright issues. The author couldn't have others in there, but I didn't care because classics are my favorites. You've got Dickens, specifically David Copperfield is very prevalent in this story. So if you are a David Copperfield fan, you should read this book. I think you'll enjoy it. So David Copperfield, Sherlock Holmes, Dorian Gray, lots of Mr. Darcy's, which is actually really, really funny. So if you love Mr. Darcy, there's a bunch of hilarious scenes with several Mr. Darcy's that were brought to life. Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights was in it, who ends up doing something very noble in the book, if you can believe it. Heathcliff is not a noble guy. And then, of course, Uriah Heep. If you are a literary fan and you are a fan of dark academia type magical realism-ish, and or you're a fan of David Copperfield, I think you will like this. I just expected something different. I wanted something cozy, not dark. So I didn't enjoy it as much. All right, what do I plan on doing for the rest of 2024? Well, I still plan on finishing the Massachusetts Center for the Book Challenge. And the books that I plan on reading for the rest of the year for that challenge, for August, it would be About Grace by Anthony Doerr. August prompt is a book whose title starts with the same letter as your birthday month. I was born in August. So A, About Grace. I love Anthony Doerr. He wrote The Light We Cannot See, which I absolutely love. So I'm really looking forward to reading something else by him. This was not my original pick. Originally, I was going to do Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, but I swapped it out for this because I'm in the mood for this. And this also is magical realism. A man graced with the gift of premonition is plagued by a dream that foretells his daughter's death. He flees thousands of miles from his family and home in a desperate hope that his dream will not come true. So this is my August pick. September is a debut book by a Massachusetts author. I chose The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and I don't know too much about this book other than it's a classic and that it's about a woman battling mental illness. October is a book about a time in history you'd like to know more about. So I chose The Last Boat Out of Shanghai, The Epic Story of the Chinese Who Fled Mao's Revolution by Helen Zia. And this is a nonfiction book about the real lives of 4 people trying to escape Shanghai during China's 1949 Communist Revolution. November's prompt is a relaxing, soul-soothing book. So I chose The Silent Traveler in Edinburgh by Chiang Yee. And this is part of a series known as The Silent Traveler, where Chiang, a Chinese expat in England, visited various places between 1933 and 1955, and he wrote about them from his perspective on things that might be unfamiliar at that time to a Chinese expat. From what I understand, they're just funny and lovely stories in here, and I love travel books. Chiang actually illustrated. He did his own illustrations, which are all in the book. And I'm really looking forward to picking this up in November. For December, the prompt was a well-reviewed book in your least favorite genre. My least favorite genre is dystopian, and my pick is Julia, a retelling of Orwell's 1984 by Sandra Newman. Now, I might actually swap this out for something else because I actually haven't heard too much about this book. And since the prompt is supposed to be a well-reviewed book, I can't really find much more on Julia. I may swap it out for I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, because I have heard a couple of people on YouTube talk about this and they really, really enjoyed it. And this is about 39 women who live imprisoned in a cage. They are watched over by guards. They have no memory of how they got there, no notion of time, and only a vague recollection of their lives before. I actually find this more interesting than I would Julia, which is told from the perspective of Julia Worthing, the love interest of 1984's Winston Smith. I read 1984 like 20 years ago. I don't remember much about it. I would have to reread it in order to start reading Julia. Maybe I will do that. I just haven't decided which one I'm actually going to go with in December. I also plan on reading some banned books in September because September has Banned Books Week. And I do believe The Bell Jar, which I'm already reading in September, is a banned book. So I have that. And then I may pick up Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. I don't think I've ever read this Toni Morrison book. I've read The Bluest Eye and Beloved, but I don't think I've ever read this, so I may pick this up. Toni Morrison gets banned all the time. So if you're looking to read banned books, you probably can't go wrong picking up any one of Toni Morrison's books. I don't know much about the Song of Solomon. Milkman Dead was born shortly after a neighborhood eccentric hurled himself off a rooftop in a vain attempt at flight. For the rest of his life, too, will be trying to fly. With this brilliantly imagined novel, Nobel Prize laureate Toni Morrison audaciously transfigures the coming-of-age story. As she follows Milkman from his Rust Belt city to the place of his family's origins, Morrison introduces an entire cast of strivers, liars, and assassins, the inhabitants of a fully realized Black world. And then the banned books of all banned books, Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. This caused chaos when it was published, first in England, then here in America. This actually has just this year come into the public domain. It was published in 1928, I think. And so that means in 2024, it would be in the public domain, I believe. I have never read Lady Chatterley's Lover, and I am looking forward to hopefully picking this up maybe in September. Lastly, something I hope to pick up maybe in November is This Land is Their Land, The Wampanoag Indians, Plymouth Colony, and the Troubled History of Thanksgiving by David J. Silverman. I don't know what the kids are being taught these days about how Thanksgiving originated, but I do know when I was a child, it was not the correct story. So I'm hoping to get the true story, especially since I am a Massachusetts native. The Wampanoag tribe here in Massachusetts is prevalent, and I do want to learn more about it. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great day. Bye.